There's this photo from 1967, Egypt, of a crew using cranes to take apart a massive carved stone head, piece by piece. That's part of Abu Simbel, one of the most famous temples in the country, and officially it's been standing since around 1264 BC, over 3,000 years old. Except the oldest drawing anyone's ever found of it is from 1819, less than 200 years old. For something that old, that's a pretty thin paper trail. Quick note before I get into this. If you've noticed I haven't posted in a while, it's because I was traveling last month, out in Bali, Indonesia. Some of the footage you're seeing today is actually from that trip. I'm back home now, but this Egypt research had been sitting half-finished since before I left, and I wanted to get it out to you. So, the official timeline for places like Abu Simbel, Karnak, and the pyramids goes back thousands of years. Built by pharaohs, buried by sand, rediscovered by Europeans in the 1800s. That's the version most of us learned in school. But once you start looking at the actual old drawings, old maps, and what people living in the region have said about these places for centuries, that timeline gets a lot less solid. Let's go through what's actually documented and what's missing. If you're into this kind of thing, old maps, gaps in the historical record, stuff that doesn't quite line up, go ahead and subscribe, because that's pretty much what this whole channel is about. Back to that 1967 photo. The official reason for the move was to save Abu Simbel from flooding after a new dam was built, and that part checks out, it's well documented. What's missing is anything before the 1800s. I looked into the earliest known mentions of the place, including asking an AI to search for them, and the answer was the same every time. No Arab travelers wrote about it, no medieval European writer mentioned it, nothing. It apparently sat buried under sand, known only to local Nubians, until a Swiss explorer named Johann Burckhardt noticed the top of it sticking out of a dune in 1813. No drawings, no written descriptions, nothing, for a temple that's supposedly over 3,000 years old. Now, look at those relocation photos again. Notice the metal rods sticking out of the stone. Officially, they're there to reinforce the structure with fresh cement while it's being moved. Could be, but it raises a question. What if parts of this temple were actually built or rebuilt much more recently? Maybe even in the 1700s, and those rods were just holding new cement in place while it's set. I can't prove that, but given how little evidence there is for anything earlier, it's a fair question to ask. Now, Karnak, over in Luxor, one of the largest temple complexes in Egypt, these photos from the 1800s show it looking less like an ancient ruin and more like the aftermath of something violent. Obelisks snapped clean in half, huge blocks scattered everywhere. The official explanation is erosion and neglect over thousands of years, but erosion doesn't usually snap a solid granite obelisk in two and throw the pieces around like that. There's an early 1800s painting of Karnak showing both obelisks still standing, fully intact, so whatever broke one of them happened after that painting was made. I also tried to track down the earliest known drawing of Karnak, which sources point to a French traveler named Paul Lucas in a book from 1704. So I actually got the book and went through it page by page. There's nothing in there that looks anything like Karnak. The closest match doesn't resemble it at all. The next real drawings come from Frederick Norden, who visited in the late 1730s. And in his work, Karnak still has both obelisks standing. So somewhere between the 1730s and those wrecked 1800s photos, something happened to this place. On top of that, the name Karnak itself only shows up in records from around the 1600s, after a French monk apparently started calling it that. Even the name is fairly recent. What did the people actually living in this region say about all this over the centuries? Medieval Arabic writers, and there were plenty of them over hundreds of years, never described an ancient Egyptian civilization going back thousands of years. They called these structures birabi, roughly meaning houses or temples, and linked them to pagans, magicians, and alchemists. That's a very different story than lost ancient civilization. The Coptic people have been in Egypt for at least 800 years and are known for careful record keeping. They say their ancestors built many of these structures, and the Coptic language is considered closely related to the script carved into the temple walls. Yet Coptic speakers aren't usually the ones brought in to help with translations. Worth thinking about. Even some of the gods on these temple walls, Amun, Isis, Osiris, also appear in Berber mythology from the same region. So the line between ancient Egyptian religion and local tradition might not be as clean as it's usually presented. This next part is one of my favorites. In Meroe, in Nubia, there's an old painting showing a man carrying two animals. They look like elephants, slung over a pole across his shoulders, like he's bringing home a couple of pigs from market. Researchers who studied it concluded it shows a man carrying two miniature elephants. Meanwhile, Berber mythology from that same region talks about people calling on giants to help build their houses and temples. And it's not just this one image. At another Nubian site called Naga, near a temple of Amun, there are carvings showing large figures standing right beside much smaller ones, and some of the statues found there show the same thing. I'm not claiming giants definitely built these places, but if you take the local stories at face value instead of dismissing them right away, it gives a pretty simple explanation for how some of these massive stones got moved. No aliens, no lost technology, just builders a lot bigger than us. People in the region have been saying this for a long time. Maybe that's worth taking seriously, at least as a possibility. Then there are the pyramids. The earliest drawings anyone's found of them date back to around the 1500s. Again, much more recent than thousands of years ago would suggest. Old Coptic and Arabic traditions say the pyramids were built by a king named Salarid before a major flood to preserve knowledge. Whether that flood happened thousands of years ago or more recently is a separate question, but it's a story that's been passed down for centuries, and it's very different from Khufu building it as a tomb for himself. There's also a painting from 1572 that labels Cairo as Babylon. Not as a nickname, that's the actual name on the map, which is odd considering the mainstream story places Babylon firmly in modern-day Iraq, thousands of years earlier and thousands of miles away. Now, if you search for Egypt online, you mostly get the same handful of places: Giza, Alexandria, maybe Luxor. But there's a lot more out there that almost nobody talks about. Take Farafra, way out in the desert. Around it, there are huge white rock formations that look almost melted, smooth, rounded, mushroom-shaped. The official explanation is wind and water erosion over millions of years. Maybe. But some researchers look at shapes like these in deserts all over the world and wonder if they're actually the remains of buildings, melted by something a lot more violent and a lot more recent than millions of years of weather. Then you've got places like Karga and Dakhla, old mud brick towns out in the desert, surrounded by ruins that don't get studied much. Google Earth images even show strange grid patterns in the sand near some of these areas, patterns nobody's really explained. There's also an unfinished obelisk sitting in a quarry near Aswan, carved with perfectly straight lines into solid rock. However it was done, it's a serious piece of engineering, apparently achieved with hand tools, according to the official story. And then there's the bigger question. Old maps from the 1700s show Egypt as green, fertile land, with cities and farmland where there's now just sand. By the early 1800s, it's a desert. The only major event historians usually point to in that window is Napoleon's invasion in 1798, and that alone doesn't really explain turning fertile farmland into desert in a few decades. So that's the gap between the official timeline and what the drawings, maps, and local accounts actually show. Maybe there's a clean explanation for all of it, or maybe a chunk of history just went missing somewhere along the way. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments which part stood out to you most, and if you like this kind of digging, subscribe, there's more of it coming.